ahead and, okay. And I see we have a few people here. They might be joining us as we go along here, but we should start right at 6:30 and try to end as close to 7:30 as we can to respect people's other commitments. We're really grateful that we have a chance to find out what's happening with the lawsuit. We know it's been going on for a little over a year now, and we'd like to know where things stand and what's kind of give the background first so everybody knows what's happening. And we will have 3 people involved in the speaking tonight. We will start with Katie Wright, who's with Better Boundaries, and she'll give us some of the history and background of the litigation and where it all started from. And then we'll hear from Laura Lewis-Ai from Mormon Women for Ethical Government. And then we'll also have Wendy Molteni from the State League to be available to answer questions and pitch in when she feels like she wants to pitch in. So thank you all very much for joining us. I guess we'll go ahead and get started and just let people join as they come in. So Katie, take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, you should be seeing my
yes. Your slides?
Yes. Is it in a slideshow? Okay, now it should be actually in a slideshow. Are you still seeing it?
Yes, that's great.
All right, excellent. So I always like to start with this slide because I think it's a funny low point back in December of 21 when there was a tweet by a national redistricting organization that noted that Utah was the most tragic of all the redistricting. And I felt seen there because every effort put forth by the people of Utah and by the Independent Commission was executed so flawlessly. And yet here we were with just heavily gerrymandered maps. However, just a few months later, I was so proud to be on the steps of the Capitol and witness League of Women Voters Utah and Mormon Women for Ethical Government and a handful of individual plaintiffs file their complaint. And I just was so impressed with the bravery of the organizations and the plaintiffs in stepping up and knew that this journey had not yet ended. So Better Boundaries is a 501c4 organization, and our mission is to make sure that voters choose their politicians and not the other way around. In 2017, we were established. In 2018, we, along with the amazing support of your organization and MWEG and other partners, were able to pass Prop 4 successfully. However, like many propositions in Utah, it's passing a law, it's not amending the Constitution, so that leaves it vulnerable for repeal. They replaced that with a watered down version, which gave an independent commission that, although well equipped to draw really excellent voter-centric maps, didn't have the teeth to be able to enforce those maps. So in 2021, we saw maps adopted that were even worse from a partisan gerrymander perspective, and also in terms of splitting up cities and counties than the ones we had had previously. So in 2022, we joined with your organization's efforts, and our role at Better Boundaries is to continue to serve in educating and engaging our really great grassroots supporters, but also really importantly, financially supporting the cost of the litigation. So why a ballot initiative? Like I said, we can only amend the Constitution of Utah by the legislature. So instead, we chose to amend the code, as in pass a law using the ballot initiative, because it's a way of circumventing the legislature, which, as we know, we're a supermajority, superminority state. So what happened in the adoption process? Well, first, to back up, Proposition 4, it took 190,000 signatures to get that on the ballot. We had more than half favorable votes. And I think it's important to note that it passed with much greater margins than most candidates. So it wasn't that one party carried this. both people of all party affiliations had to opt in for us to have the margins we did. And in 2022, the legislature repealed a Prop 4 and passed SB 200, which is currently the law of the land when it comes to redistricting. Just to highlight just a reminder of how adoption looked, we had a committee and a commission. The commission was independent. It did not look at incumbent data. It followed legal standards, but also really followed standards that are voter-centric. As an example, minimizing whenever possible, dividing up or splitting cities and counties, which is something that is universally asked for and a good principle of voter-centric. They did hearings statewide. A big difference between the two process was that the independent commission listened to people at those hearings, actually took the feedback and acted on it. Their maps were available in draft form. And after going to a certain community or meeting, they would go back to their maps and tweak them, improve them based on the input that they had heard from the people. Whereas the legislative committee's process, although they sat there and was in the room when there was input, there was actually no indication that it was ever taken into consideration. Their maps were drawn behind closed doors. We never saw draft maps. It was really a process done in the proverbial smoke-filled room. And that was the difference between the two process, among others, of course. So there's kind of three legs to the stool of how we thought about it. There was the independent commission, how'd they do? Because we've heard horror stories about how they've done in other states. There was a public engagement, like did Utahns care? Did they participate? And finally, there was politics. And I will say our independent commission really knocked it out of the park. They were very transparent. They were innovative in bringing transparency to the process. They were really cohesive across partisan differences. We had one moment where someone tried to bring partisanship into the conversation. That person stepped down, and the remaining 6 commissioners unanimously voted for maps that very same evening, and they represented Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And so it was clear that they stood strong, not allowing partisanship to pierce their independent process. It was really an impressive moment. And they met all the requirements and they exceeded their guidelines. And we know that because they have a comprehensive report that measured the maps on all these different criteria. The public also knocked it out of the park. We had absolutely incredible levels of engagement from Utahns. They attended meetings, they drew maps, they gave commentary. We know that the final maps put forth by the legislative committee were posted at 10:30 on a Friday night in preparation for a Monday 2 p.m. meeting, and Utahns crashed that website over the weekend. The website was so overwhelmed by the level of engagement, and that engagement overwhelmingly said, these are terrible maps, choose the independent maps. Our engagement was higher than our neighboring states who have much bigger populations of Arizona and Colorado and also have independent process. So really you have to hand it to Utahns. They've been engaged from the beginning and they have not given up. And I will tell you, they still generously will respond to my emails saying, I'm fired up, keep fighting, or send a $25 check. People are still at the table despite how much of a long haul this has become. But politics are politics. And unfortunately, what we learned is that our theory that politicians are too self-interested to be in charge of drawing the lines that get them elected panned out. And we saw from both Republicans and Democrats that given the opportunity to draw themselves safe seats, they took it. And so it just proves that an independent process that takes this out of the hands of self-interested politicians is absolutely necessary. So the lawsuit, there are 2 major claims. The first is that the maps are a partisan gerrymander, and that goes against our constitutional rights, our constitutional right to a free election, and also our protected rights for equal protection, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and the right to vote. And we have an explicit right, affirmed right to vote in our state constitution, which is a really nice provision. And then the second part is that the repeal of Proposition 4 itself was illegal. So we also have an explicit right to reform our government as the people in the Utah Constitution. And I think it's a really good legal question to ask, how are we able to exercise that right now when the will of the people is so easily overturned by the legislature? The people and the legislature are co-equals in the law, but I don't think it feels that way to the people right now. The legal team is Zimmerman Brewer. They are the preeminent appellate court here, or appellate firm here in Utah. Parr Brown, we have David Ryman, who's just a fantastic trial attorney. And then Campaign Legal Center is a national, nonpartisan organization that fights against political corruption and for voting rights. And they actually have Utah roots. They were born out of the Hinckley Institute, are in DC, but work nationwide. Really wonderful expertise. And then, of course, the partners, you know who they are, and I'm going to let them speak on their own behalf. And then the case quickly, it's been a roller coaster. And I actually have a timeline of every single thing that has happened, and I was trying to find it. So I'm sorry, I couldn't pull it up in time, but there's a lot of ups and downs. We're not surprised by this. This was expected. But first, there was a motion to stay the court case. That was denied. There was a motion to dismiss. That was mostly denied. Then the interlocutory appeals were granted, which essentially means it gets kicked out of the district court up to the Utah Supreme Court. They decide if the court should be looking at it at all. And if they say, yes, they should, it goes back to the district court. The district court process is now stayed, meaning on ice, as the Utah Supreme Court makes their decision, and we go through that process. I just want to point out that grassroots organizations like the League and like Mormon Women for Ethical Government are the backbone to all of this. I know that in my own busy day, raising my children and going to work, sometimes I don't want to take that minute to write my legislator, but every action that volunteers and volunteer organizations like yours have taken are the foundation for the lawsuit. So I just want to remind you, as people who I know are active participants in our democracy, that those actions matter, even when it feels like you're getting nowhere. So I'm really proud of that and very, very grateful to the Utahns and the organizations that continue to be in this fight. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Laura.
Okay, thank you so much, Katie. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, and that was like the perfect background for the commission and Prop 4 and for the litigation and kind of where we are now. And so I'm just going to speak to MWEG and our involvement with the litigation, and also how we got involved from the beginning. And I just want to say, first off, how proud MWEG is to be alongside the League of Women Voters in this case, and to be working together to give Utahns more power to choose the elected officials that represent us. And so throughout the presentation, I'm going to talk about power very deliberately. And I wanted to start by clarifying that, that the sort of power that MWEG is talking about is characterized through 3 descriptors, and that is principled, persuasive, and protective. And we believe that this sort of power is the sort of power that can have a transformative effect on peoples and systems. And all of MWEG's work is guided by 4 core attributes. Those are faithful, nonpartisan, peaceful, and proactive. And so our decision to become involved with this litigation was very much a principled one. Like the League, we are nonpartisan. And so we decided to get involved in this litigation after a deliberative process, thinking through what our principles are and what this means for Utahns. While we are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, almost all of our women have deep ties to the faith and feel compelled by our personal beliefs to engage with the suffering that we see in the world. And MWEG, that means being courageous actors in the public sphere who proactively seek policy solutions that maximize the potential for positive impact on Americans. And like I mentioned before, as an organization, we don't align with any political party. Our members represent a cross-partisan group of principled voters. And by way of example, 3 of the individual plaintiffs in the lawsuit are actually MWEG members and are members of both major political parties in Utah. The diversity of public opinion is important because MWEG is a grassroots organization like the League. This is core to who we are and our involvement in the lawsuit. And our participation in this litigation was made possible by our MWEG Utah members. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about the involvement from the beginning of our members, even before we entered the lawsuit. We believe that our MWEG members epitomize the spirit of what we are asking for in our litigation, which is power for Utahns to be able to choose their representatives. And really, they're the real stars of the show. So because we are not organized around partisan politics, early on, MWEG drafted our principles of ethical government, and we use this document internally to guide and inform our advocacy work, and externally to provide transparency as a grassroots organization to advocate for fair districting and exercise political power based on principles and not partisanship. And as an example, one of the MWEG's principles of ethical government states that political structures and electoral systems should be designed to maximize participation of and provide equitable access to all citizens in a society. And because we are committed to democratic principles of fair representation and citizen participation in government, protecting the right to vote is one of our main advocacy areas. But voting is only effective if votes are equally weighted. And so fairly drawn representative districts are key to ensuring that voters have access to and power to vote in meaningful ways. We believe that we must hold our elected representatives accountable and protect representative government. It was easier for MWEG to decide to participate in the litigation knowing that our actions aligned with our clearly articulated principles. Shared principles are critical if we are to maintain a healthy democracy. And we believe that political power cannot be ethically exercised when it's arbitrary. Principled engagement respects and honors the integrity of citizens, giving them the opportunity to use the vote to lend their power to representatives who are open about their motives. When political actors cannot clearly articulate their driving principles or don't consistently act in accordance with them, citizens should be cautious about giving them access to power. And Katie very eloquently demonstrated how that was definitely the case with this between the commission and the legislative committee and the way they drew the maps. So MWEG has been involved with advocating for fair districts generally in Utah, specifically in a variety of ways for several years. This has been a collaborative effort with members, volunteers, and leaders all working in tandem on different aspects of the process. So in the next few slides, I'll give you some examples of how MWEG is involved with this cause. And while MWEG leaders encouraged participation in these efforts, our members did not need much encouraging. Looking back at our private discussion group over this period, there is post after post from women who learned about this issue and felt personally motivated to pitch in. These are members These members' efforts involve exercising power in a second way by utilizing methods of persuasion. And exercising power based on persuasion requires a willingness to take the time to articulate a position using information that is true and well researched. MWEG members and leaders have written educational pieces for our online library, as well as articles and opinion pieces, and they have made media appearances and spoken to podcast audiences. And we have shared these personal expressions with our members and on our public platforms. Persuasion also involves meeting people where they are and taking the time to create relationships and then work together in ways that support our governing institutions. MWEG members exemplified this when they held public education events on redistricting, informing our members and the broader community about the redistricting process. They submitted their own maps to the commission, provided comments and feedback on the commission maps, and openly encouraged and supported friends and neighbors as they did the same. And another example of this commitment to utilizing recognized processes and institutions to exercise power in legitimate ways was the call to action issued by our Utah chapter in favor of the independent maps. And this call resulted in hundreds of letters and phone calls to the legislative committee, urging them to adopt the commission's fair maps. And when the legislature instead passed their own maps, our Utah chapter issued an official statement in response. And finally, we believe that power is used most ethically when it is done with the intent to protect others. In this instance, MWEG members saw that elected officials were inappropriately using the political power loaned to them by the citizens in order to limit the ability of those same citizens to enjoy fair representation. In contrast, our MWEG members have supported this case by using protective power. Many of them share party affiliation with those controlling the legislature, yet they're lending us their voices and names as MWEG members, allowing us to have legal standing to be a plaintiff as an organization, ensuring that our attempt to achieve fair districting was grounded in personal commitment to act on behalf of the welfare of others. And you can also support this work by donating to MWEG and by sharing information about the lawsuit with your friends and neighbors, posting on social media. One really effective tool that you can use is writing a letter to your local paper expressing support and using our common values to articulate why. MWEG has this really great op-ed lab where we can help you, edit your letter and submit it to papers and just kind of walk you through the whole process, so it's not as scary. So, this QR code can take you to our website and give you more information about that if that's something you're interested in doing. But most importantly, my invitation to you is decide to act in a way that protects others. We truly believe that the best way individual citizens can protect democracy is to focus just as diligently on preserving the rights of others as they do their own. We are grateful for the opportunity that this lawsuit has given our organization to act upon that critical value. We hope that it serves as a reminder to the average citizen of that their vote and their voice matter, and that any attempts to make them feel powerless should not go unchecked. And I think that as the League of Women Voters Utah, that's definitely something that you all are doing by actively participating as well. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, that's some really good background for all of us from you. Thank you very, very much for sharing that with us. We're going to spend the rest of our time hearing from those of you that are involved in the State League, and also fielding questions from anyone who's attending this Zoom who might be wondering what's happening and what they can do to jump in and help. So I think I'll just first ask everybody that wants to participate to unmute themselves, and we can have a dialogue and discussion, and see if we can learn a little bit more from those of you who are more closely aligned with this fight. So thank you all for being here. Anybody from the State League want to jump in here? And yes, go ahead.
I'm Gigi Brandt, and I would like to point out that the League of Women Voters of Utah has had a position favoring an independent commission since 1980. That some of you were born after that. It was, as I recall, it was initiated by the Weaver League initially, and we studied and took a position. It's slightly different, that a commission is the way to go. Also, our national organization, because of the president at that time, particularly, who came from California and worked on their independent redistricting, Chris Carson, had a nationwide thing called People Power Fair Maps to try to do a nationwide redistricting thing, which I think has helped. And again, with Laura and Katie, I who have been involved in this, I carried petitions in 2011, which we were not well funded, but we still got 55,000 signatures, not enough to get on the ballot. Was just overwhelmed by the public participation in the in both in the legislature particularly, and I think it was hard in 2017 and 18 for us when we carried petitions, because a lot of the citizens, it just wasn't on their radar. They didn't, only if they remembered. And I don't think that's the case now. I think even though it's another 10 years before we redistrict, that we have an aware and wise public, that public information and education is going to be easier next time around.
Thank you. I should share that after this all happened, there was a redistricting coalition. Everyone's kind of feeling down, and Gigi was able to bring some perspective on how far we've come from people not even understanding that this is an issue. And so I'm grateful for the League and others who really did that groundwork over the decades to get us where we are now. It really is important to remember that these big fights are fought, over the long term, and progress has been made. So thanks, Gigi, for always bringing that perspective. I appreciate it.
Does anybody have information what going forward in the Supreme Court is going to look like?
Well, I'm happy to say that. I can just share. I spoke to David Ryman just yesterday, so I have sort of a fresh conversation about it. And the reality is there's a lot of unknowns, because we have 3 new justices on our state Supreme Court. And, people who know a lot more about these things than I do have said, especially with Justice Lee retiring, who was just a force of personality on the court, no one really knows sort of what the culture is going to look like. Apparently their discretionary docket, so things they don't have to take but they've taken, is quite large. So I guess that means we're among others. We're in at least common company with some other cases. But there's no easy predictions here.
No.
Deb, you need to unmute.
Do you anticipate that it will be resolved by 2024, or, are you looking at the end of this year or the end of the decade, or how long?
I think it's an unknown. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to it. I think it's an unknown. Certainly that continues to be the focus of the legal team, is to keep it moving as they can through the court. But the timeline is challenging.
Yeah.
I know Laura suggested that op-eds in our local paper were a good way to get our voices heard. Are there other ways that we should be keeping this in the forefront of everybody's minds as this all works its way through the courts?
Oh, I was just going to add, so I can speak to that, but also just what Katie was saying. I know, so the lawsuit, I was just going to add that the lawsuit is only concerning the congressional maps. And I know that they did that very deliberately. One, because they were the most egregious, but two, also to try to not like elongate the process, I guess, so that it can, you know, the goal was to have something in place before the next election cycle. But like she said, there's just unknown there. But it's as far as like what we can do, and I'm sure Katie has ideas on that. A lot of times people will, in these cottage meetings, will say, you know, now that it's in the courts, like there's nothing that we can do. So why do anything? And I think it's important to realize that we need to hold our elected representatives accountable. That in principle, that's really important. And so continuing to speak out, write about it, talking to our friends and neighbors, you know, posting about it. This is, like Gigi was talking about, this is a long haul fight. And so, you know, while it is in the court's hands right now, this is a conversation that we need to be continuing to have. And so, in any way that we can speak out and keep the momentum going, I think is important.
I agree. And I just think it's good to continually tie together the either bad policy or bad governance that we're seeing to back to its root, which is often gerrymandering, where you see unchecked power, lack of competition for ideas or policies, uncontested elections, extremists. These are all outcomes of gerrymandering. And so when you see it, you can name it and remind people this problem we're experiencing is actually by design. It's the design of partisan gerrymandering. Whatever that issue that might be important to you.
We aren't the only area that has suffered. Those of you who read the Tribune or the New York Times know about Margaret Wrinkle and Nashville, Tennessee. They did the same thing to Nashville. They divided it up so that the city really has no voice in congressional matters. And since I live in Salt Lake City, and I'm an urban resident, one of the things I bring up to my neighbors and friends is that there are at least many of us in the city that wish that the Congress would take up some sort of gun control or gun, you know, and the way that our congressional delegation is shaped, we don't have a chance of even having our voice heard, let alone acted on. And, you know, children's biggest cause of children's deaths under the age of 18 is by gun violence. And it's sad that we as a state that supposedly loves its children don't seem to be willing to take that up, and partly because they won't get there. And
there are other questions about what's coming down the pike?
I do have a question. How much of your day do you typically think is spent working on this versus, you know, your day job versus just your life?
Who is that question for?
I mean, anyone can answer it. If you're all involved, I'm sure most of your time is taken up by this. So I'm just curious how much you put towards it.
I can say for me, it has dropped off, but while we were in the process of listening to the commission and the committee's hearings, it was pretty close to a full-time job.
Yeah.
And then reporting back and meeting as a group for the league. making sure that we were all on the same page. So yeah, in a way, I'm kind of glad that it's moved on to the lawsuit phase, unfortunately. But yeah, that was a very long year. And I'm sure it was for Laura as well. I testified right behind Laura at one of the committee meetings, and it was a lot.
So I guess a follow-up question is what do you think is your driving force behind spending all this time for something that, you don't get paid for or takes up so much of your time?
Well, I think Laura said this before, if your vote
Doesn't
is
count.
predetermined to not count, then nothing else matters in a democracy. I mean, it's the fate of democracy that you should be able to choose between candidates and ideas. And if that is predetermined of which party is going to win, and the person running in the primary gets to outdo somebody else in a primary, what's the point?
I'm sure you've come across this question before when you register voters, that somebody says, well, why should I bother to vote? My vote doesn't count. And I guess that's maybe the primary reason that we want, you get a better government when you think your vote and your voice counts in some way.
I want to go back to the lawsuit again.
Okay.
Why? I don't quite understand why it didn't follow the normal process of going through the district court and then maybe why was it jumped up to the Supreme Court?
Well, the easy answer, the straightforward answer is that as in the defense filed for this thing called an interlocutory appeal, which is like an extraordinary appeal that gets to skip that process. And then the plaintiffs also filed one saying, we think this should go to the district court, but if you are going to take it up, then we take up our appeal on a claim that was dismissed. And so that's what the court did. There's no indication of why. There's no explanation or like written description of that. I have heard the lawyers say maybe it's because this is so it's such an important case, and these things were going to get to them eventually, that maybe they wanted to shortcut that piece. But I think it's tea leaves really that we're trying to read. And I mean, I would welcome what other people have heard. I think it's really hard to tell, but there's no doubt it's an important case. Everyone knows that. So
maybe it was a good reason rather than just that they're just sitting on it.
Yeah.
Katie, we had this question in some of the cottage meetings. Could you talk about why it's important for it to go through the discovery process and have it heard by the lower courts before it gets to the Supreme Court?
Yes.
I think the preference on that was twofold. I think it's a more expedited process, so there's that piece of it. But also the maps are very egregious. When we did an analysis of it, or actually the independent commission did an analysis of them, there's a 0.5% chance. If you produce 1 million maps, there's a 0.5% chance of getting a map that guarantees the political outcomes that this map guarantees. So what that says is it was very intentional and very precise gerrymander. And so what I think would be nice about a hearing is that all of that would come out into the public, of having experts talk about, hey, this isn't just, a little politically tilted. It's extreme and it's purposeful. And hearing that and the facts and the data and the analysis, I think would be really compelling.
Any other questions?
I did find that timeline. If I could share my screen really quickly and show it to you if you want to look at it.
Okay.
We're gonna send it out in an email soon. Do you see?
Yes.
Do you see it? Okay. So you can just see. I mean, this is like a lot of lawyers pushing a lot of papers around, and I don't say that dismissively. I say that to just be really grateful that we have been able to finance all of this so far. And it's because Campaign Legal Center is doing this completely pro bono, and the Utah firms are doing this low bono. And this much filing costs a lot of money. So I mean, we're just really grateful that Utahns have stepped up to make this possible, and that we have such great legal expertise. We're not doing this on a shoestring with inexperienced people. We cannot. That's not a path to success. So yeah, I just look at this and I think of lots of paper and hourly fees. So it's been important that we have the really great expertise that we've had.
Katie, why don't you explain why Better Boundaries isn't a plaintiff in the suit?
Well, we are not a membership organization, although
people understand that.
Well, that is the reason. So we have our grassroots donors and supporters, but we're not a membership organization. So we don't. There's a legal term for that of what it means to have standing. And so we wouldn't. But it is our pleasure to play the part that we can play.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone know some of the federal cases that have gone before the federal Supreme Court may play into what happens in Utah? Does anybody have any insights into that, or is that a totally different subject?
Well, the Harper case in North Carolina hasn't been decided yet, and that has the potential to really wreak havoc on elections and things, and that essentially says that state legislatures have a special role. And of course, our legislature would love to see a favorable decision from the Supreme Court. And again, we don't really know how it's going to turn out.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking.
And that's another case for people to be familiar with, so that they can talk to their neighbors about. There's been some publicity, but I don't think the average citizen, even an involved citizen, really understands what that case is really about. Mm-hmm. And it's very important.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for yeah.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah.
It was heard almost a week and a half ago, and there was I think there was an opinion out there that some of the judges really showed some skepticism on this fringe legal theory called the independent state legislature theory. Also, there's this interesting group, which is like a conference or an organization of all the state Supreme Courts, and they very rarely weigh in or file amicus brief, but they as a group filed an amicus brief on Moore versus Harper, really saying this is not good. And that's all the state Supreme Courts speaking as one voice. Yeah. So I like to think about that when I'm worried about it in the middle of the night. That feels like a little piece of optimism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard to stay optimistic in this environment, isn't it?
At times. So you need those positive stories. Yeah. I'm going to put in the chat the Brennan Center's explanation of this case.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? How are we doing for time? We got about 15 minutes left of.
I have a question for you as the Cash League. How do you think redistricting affects you?
Well, we've had some real stark reality checks on the redistricting, not necessarily the congressional districts, but our state legislatures districting. Those of us who live in sort of Logan Central had it chopped up just like Salt Lake. Right. And our districts now go in Cache County, they go vertically to include, so Logan is sliced 4 times. So I moved in the first time in my 37 years of living in Logan to a different district this year, which also included Richmond and Fremont and other more rural areas. And it just makes it even more difficult for any other voices than, the predominant voices in our county as well to be heard in the state. Some excellent candidates that just did not have even a shot of getting into our state legislature because of this gerrymander that happened just this last cycle. So that's on my my immediate
well, that's
impact on me and people that I know here in Cache Valley.
Yeah.
And I know that you've been facing that in the federal congressional districts in Salt Lake City as they continually chop up Salt Lake so that it's watered down in its voice and can't speak as one. We're experiencing the same thing. The urban areas in Cache County have been chopped up in a similar way. Anyone else want to speak to Wendy's observation there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited about this. The State League working with the naturalization ceremonies. We got an email about that earlier this week. And there's one place where we can help register some new voters that are new Americans that can have their voice heard. And I'm going to be sending out an email with more information to our Cache League about how we can get involved, and maybe we can carpool down to the naturalization ceremonies and help out in that regard.
It's a wonderful experience. You won't ever forget it. I mean, it truly is. Every league member should try it once. It's a really heartwarming experience.
Gigi, do you know, or does anybody know when the larger ones happen, the 200 people ones? Is it a certain time of the year?
I think maybe it's the summer. One of my fun stories that I tell was the time that I did it was right after the theater massacre in Colorado. Mm-hmm. And I went and they put us in the corner. And right before the ceremony was again, there was a man that came in shorts and with a gun on himself. And all I could think about was, where would I hide if he decided to take it out? I don't know what kind of an officer he was, but it was an interesting experience. But but I think if the judges ask for people to tell their stories, and it really makes it brightens your day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Helen has let me know that the large ones coming up are Wednesday, March 15th, Wednesday, July 5th, and there will likely be 2 more on September 18th and December 13th. Okay. I'll send her an email with everyone who's let me know that they want to be there, and she has a sign-up page that you can add your name to if you want to go to any of those.
Okay. And Kendra, I was thinking I would send that call out to the whole membership of the Cache Valley League. I haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be fine, especially for some of these larger ones. They definitely could use some extra hands.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It'd be fun for a bunch of us to just go down together too.
Yeah. Yeah. And makes it easier so we don't all have to drive separately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anybody else want to chime in, or should we sign off? We really appreciate you guys taking the time to come and and talk with us.
Thank
We're
you
just
for having
we're a new league. We're just trying to find our footing, and so we appreciate knowing what's going on from this perspective of other people in the state. So appreciate that very much.
If any of you would like to participate with the redistricting committee for the league for the state, we would be happy to have you join us.
Yes.
And how do we do that? Do we
Email Kathy Beely
And
we will get you looped in.
yes.
Okay. Kathy. What's her
The
last
president of the state league.
Oh, the president of the state league. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that invitation. We'll
Yes.
follow up on that too.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. What do you think, Debbie? Or should we wind it up? You have to unmute.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, we will post
Thanks,
this.
Laura. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for
Thank you so
joining.
much.
Okay, see you next time. Thank you, guys.
Have a nice evening. Don't get too cold.
All right. Good night.
Night.